episode 389, How to Approach Modern Coffee Processing with Christopher Feran. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop. This show is designed to give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional, really to just help you build and run a thriving coffee shop. Now, I would really encourage you to subscribe to Keys to the Shop. There's a lot of episodes that come out every month, about 10 or so. And over the course of the last 6 years that Keys to the Shop has been running, we've got about, I think, over 700 episodes that have officially been aired on the show. And content such as today's conversation around coffee processing is just one of many topics that get covered that'll help you build a great coffee business. Go to keystotheshop.com and you can learn more by going to the episodes page and perusing that. But staying subscribed to the show really gets you up to date with the new content coming out. And one last favor to ask you, it's really great when you share Keys to the Shop on your accounts like Instagram or on LinkedIn, wherever your circle of professional friends and acquaintances are, or with your team at your coffee shop. Spreading the word about the great guests and their content on the show and the topics that we cover on all of these episodes really goes a long way to help Keys to the Shop. And I really appreciate all of you who have done that so far. Thank you so much. Now, Keys to the Shop is not just a podcast, but it's also a consulting and coaching company. Just like the way that this podcast is trying to help you build great foundations and refine your operations and your leadership for excellence in your shop, that's exactly what Keys to the Shop consulting is all about as well. One-on-one coaching, on-site assessment, barista training, and more. There's lots of different ways that we can work together to help you build your coffee shop the right way the first time. Or if you are an owner of an already existing shop and you want to take things to the next level, Keys to the Shop Consulting comes alongside you and gives you the clarity, tools, and solutions that you need. And I would love to have a conversation with you. All you need to do to set up a free discovery call with me is email chris@keystotheshop.com. We'll talk all about what's going on in your world and how Keys to the Shop Consulting can help. Again, that email for Keys to the Shop Consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, every time I see another shop post a picture of this piece of equipment in their store, I get really excited. Of course, I'm talking about the ground control Cyclops brewer from Voga Coffee. And I get excited because I know that whatever coffee they're using, it's going to reach its fullest expression in that machine. The ground control Cyclops brewer absolutely is a game changer when it comes to tapping into the full potential of your coffee. The SCA award-winning extraction technology gives you access to an incredible range of flavors. So it levels up the batch brew, but it not only does this, it also makes tea, batch iced lattes, batch cold brew. People are using the ground control for a lot of different applications. So it brings profitability and better workflow at the same time. So check them out over at groundcontrol.coffee to learn more. If you're wanting to up your quality, efficiency, and profitability, bringing in a ground control Cyclops brewer to your cafe is a great choice. Again, for more information, visit them over at groundcontrol.coffee. Now, I have a rule. I don't ever promote something on this show that I do not believe in and think that will benefit you as a listener. It's one of the things that I value the most in the way that I operate in my business is integrity. And when I promote products, that's also what I look for in others as well. The people behind the products. As much as I can, that's what I do. So when I get to do advertisements for companies like the Barista series from Pacific, it lines up so well. They have been advocates for the barista community and coffee community for decades. And it shows in the different events that they sponsor and, of course, in the products that they produce. The Barista series was in fact created for baristas and has been tested by baristas for years to make sure that it stands up to the heat from steaming and the real application in the cafe, that the texture is perfect for latte art and the high standard we have for that in the coffee shop, and the balance of the beverage is focused on the coffee. So all of this research and development so that you can have a trusted product that brings your customers happiness in a cup. and your baristas love it as well. So go check them out over at pacificfoodservice.com for more information and to get your hands on some of their products to try it for yourself. If you're looking for the best in the business for plant-based beverages, then I highly recommend you start using the Barista Series from Pacific. All right, everyone. Well, I think you're really going to enjoy today's interview. We are welcoming back to the show a returning guest. Christopher Feran was one of the owners of Phoenix Coffee Roasters and is now doing full-time what he's been doing for many, many years, which is being one of the world's best coffee consultants, green buyers, and roasters. He is a lapsed Q grader and he has years of experience helping startups and established companies in the Midwest and California, New York City, as well as a lot of exporters and coffee growers in producing countries like Guatemala, Colombia, and Ethiopia. Christopher has been a pioneering coffee professional for a long time, and he regularly publishes thought-provoking blogs and articles that have challenged and pushed the industry forward for many years now. And most recently, he has published what he calls the sort of glossary of coffee processes, which is like a collective list of all of the current iterations of coffee processing that we have available to us as roasters, as green buyers, and breaks down what they are, what the process is, what it means for you as a roaster, etc. And it's very, very helpful. And so I thought it would be a great time to have Christopher on the show again, this time focusing in on specifically that, the coffee processing methods and how we need to approach the way processing is right now for our coffee roasteries. We need to evolve our understanding of this as that particular area of coffee evolves. And we need to figure out what it means for the coffees we bring in and how we can best serve our customers through understanding and integrating some of these modern coffee processing methods. And Christopher does a fantastic job breaking a lot of this down for us in our conversation. And after this, I really think you should go to his website, christopherferan.com, and read a lot of what he's written there as well. There's a reason why some of the most influential professionals from all over the world have sought out and been influenced by Christopher's writings and services. Here now is my conversation about coffee processing methods with Christopher Feran. Well, Christopher, welcome back to Keys to the Shop. How are you these days?
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. Things are good. Things are busy and getting really cold here in Cleveland.
What are you up to these days?
So these days, I'm primarily working as an independent consultant. Most of my work is on the buying side of things. So I work as an independent consulting buyer for roasting companies that don't have that capacity in-house or only want to focus on specific areas of their buying, like their high-end program, and then need someone just for blend maintenance or whatever.
Okay. You always have your finger on the pulse of what's happening when it comes to the relationship between green coffee and how that is going to serve a particular roasting company and their needs. And so obviously you are very adept at explaining exactly what they have available to them and what might be best for them. And that's why this conversation, I think, is really great to have with you, especially around the idea of coffee processing, which seems to be one of the number one, outside of just origin itself. The main thing we're going to think about when we think about what we're going to bring in is, well, what type of these origins are we going to bring in? And you've been getting a lot of questions about this recently.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about how that kind of snowballed into you developing a standalone resource to answer the questions that you've been kind of inundated with.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously started with my blog. So I started writing about coffee shortly before the pandemic, and a lot of what I focused on was processing related, and that escalated when there was the whole controversy surrounding infused coffees and the introduction of Koji processed coffees at WBC back in 2021. And since that time, people recognized that I know a thing or two about processing and began to reach out asking me questions about specific processes that they saw in the marketplace. Pretty commonly would a question might go, hey, I saw this thing that was called this, and then they said they did this, and what does that actually mean? And so I began fielding these questions like, dozens a week. And at some point, it was Scott Rayo or Luca who said, "Hey, you should just really write this up," which I resisted for a long time because if you've seen the blog post on it, there are a number of processes to talk about. So I had to come up with a framework to conceptualize them and break them down.
So that serves as sort of the central place where people can get their questions answered about what these processes currently, the current slate of processes that a roaster or an importer might have available to them. You have obviously had a long career in coffee to develop this understanding and then staying in, step with the industry as it's developed. How has your own understanding of processes and methods of preparing coffee on the farm level sort of developed over the years, and how has it kind of tracked with the industry?
Yeah, at this point, I've been a buyer for over 10 years. And when I first became a buyer, it was sort of in name only. I guess I was technically purchasing the coffee, but I was just buying basically blind off importers spot lists. And it wasn't until I traveled for the first time 2 years into my career as a buyer that I sort of understood that the way that we processed coffee has a dramatic impact on the resulting flavor. At that point, we were talking about essentially just washed and natural coffees. Honey was starting to come into vogue, but that was pretty much it. You go down to Brazil, you've got your pulp natural, things like that. But the more that I looked at it as I was walking around farms, I realized that, like, hey, in this community, they ferment their coffee dry, and in this community, they ferment it underwater, and they taste different, even though they're both growing ostensibly the same cultivar. And it started to open up a lot of questions for me, particularly surrounding the Kenyan process, which I've written about, and some of the more nuanced changes that happen between those two trees or schools of processing. I connected with Lucia Solis in 2016, and at that point she was still working for Scott Labs, doing yeast fermentations and trying to rep their yeast across Latin America, and became kind of a roasting partner for her to be able to have a commercial channel to test these things out at a larger scale and have them go to market. So when I started working with her back then, it really gave me a crash course in some of the deeper levers that we could pull in the coffee industry to create flavor. So working with her over the course of 2 years, I developed my skill set and my understanding. And by the time 2017, 2018 rolled around, I felt very confident and had been on my own processing coffee at that point in Guatemala, Colombia, places like that.
Okay, so now we've had Lucia on the show prior, and I think one of the questions we talked about was the idea of, influencing flavor and the levers that we pull, as you've said, to do so, versus the idea of the innate flavor of the coffee that we like to tout as being the virtue of a coffee, like just let the coffee shine, sure. Which was behind the infused coffee controversy, where we feel like there's a thin line between processing, freedom in processing, and then adulteration. How did that conversation go in your head as you started to learn more and sort of synthesize all of these different things together?
Yeah, something as a buyer started to feel really strange for me I want to say it was about 2015, when I was cupping coffees and said, hey, this tastes like a Kenya, but it's from Colombia. Or this tastes like, it's a natural Ethiopian, but it's from Nicaragua. And so these old paradigms or categorizations of terroir, as they were known, started to erode quite dramatically for me on the coffee table. And at that point, I said, there's got to be something more to this. Maybe coffee isn't exactly like wine in the way that people want it to be. So I started diving deeper, and it turns out that, yes, the genetic material, the tree, the place, the climate, the rainfall, those conditions absolutely matter. How ripe we pick it. That's your starting material. But then we do transform it pretty dramatically in the processing stage. And all you have to do is take a coffee that is quote unquote natural process, have one dried in full sun on the patio, have one that is dried in shade on raised beds, and cup them. That's it. That's all you need to do, and you'll taste the difference. And once you realize that, the relationship between origin and flavor becomes a lot murkier. So I think that's exciting. It opens up a world of possibility for producers who aren't necessarily just bound to produce coffee that tastes like, I don't know, tastes like rubber because they're growing catamore or something like that. At lower altitudes, they can actually have an impact on the marketability and the quality of their coffee. That's kind of how I conceptualize it. It's almost like I always describe it as a very gestalt thing, which is, it's different than the sum of its parts. So you can have it your super clean floral peachy geisha maybe, and then you can turn it into a raspberry bomb, or you can do the same thing with a Castillo if you wanted to. And there are some producers around the world who are doing incredibly sophisticated things to produce flavors predictably that we don't expect to find in certain cultivars.
Okay, so these innovations and the experimentation and the levers that are being pulled to change the flavor of coffee, and as you've said, to break free from some of the long-held assumptions about what that origin should taste like, which I guess, should is a loaded word also. Is that driven primarily by market demand? Or is it truly, as you say, or is it something more trendy that's not sustainable?
Sure. I had a really interesting conversation with Tim Hines from Sucafina about this as we were talking about whether CQI needs to introduce a different standard of cupping for these experimental style, competition style processes, the anaerobics of the world, carbonic maceration, things like that, because he started seeing them come up from time to time as he was going around the world doing these CQI trainings. And the reflection that I had was that if we broke down how much coffee was actually traded in these styles, it's still very, very, very small, less than 1%, less than a fraction of a percent in truth. So the fact that they dominate so much industry conversation is misaligned with that reality, just from an objective volume standpoint. And so it makes me wonder how much the echo chamber of social media and Instagram is informing this. Yet, as I was walking around Ethiopia 2 weeks ago, everywhere I went, everyone had their blue plastic barrels and they were experimenting with anaerobic coffee. So I don't know if it's an actual demand or a perception of demand, but this spread and exchange of ideas that is empowered and enabled by the internet is certainly driving producers to try new things, which can be a really, really powerful thing for coffee growers around the world to experience their coffee in a different way and be able to present it to different markets, perhaps at a higher price. I'm not one who drinks a lot of these more aggressively or enhanced processed coffees. I like my clean coffees, whether they're of any style. But there is a certain segment of the industry who's willing to pay a lot of money for these styles of coffees. And of course, other markets around the world. We're in the U.S. here having this conversation, but in Asia, there's a lot of demand for these kind of funkier coffees, a totally different aesthetic, which is cool. I think that's the main consideration is if a producer can do something and sell their coffee, that's fantastic. Especially if they get a better price than they're currently getting. I do think that a lot of these styles of coffee originated from baristas, originated from the competition stage, rather than being something that producers thought up on their own. And that feedback loop has encouraged the growth over time and that snowball effect that you referred to.
So kind of pushing the boundaries of coffee from within the industry and then seeing what the consumer demand truly is as it, matriculates through the industry. And that's, I guess, the question that a lot of people would have as they enter into the conversation about processes is, well, I need to understand what is available to me, but I also need to understand, how much of a percentage of my menu can be taken up by things that are experimental versus things that, for all intents and purposes, we may not like the idea that there's a predictable flavor that we have in mind when we think about Guatemalans or Sumatrans and things like that. But customers tend to really like that, So there's this tension. But when we're creating our menus as roasters, how do we navigate that?
Yeah, I think that a lot of folks who get into coffee do it because of their own passion and interest, which is an inherent tension because your customer's not always going to agree with you. And the reality of the marketplace, especially in the United States, is that coffee is a heavily ritualized beverage. It's a habit-forming beverage. We want the same thing. We want the same experience every single day, and that's led to the growth of some of the largest brands that you see. Something like 73% of coffee is sold by just 10 companies across the U.S. who provide a very reliably medium or dark roasted coffee, and they don't fit any of these styles. So I think that the idea that keeps us engaged and excited about doing the work that we do is having these new flavor experiences and discovering something that we haven't tasted before, and finding new ways to present it to customers and get them excited so that they have that aha moment like that I might have had with a blueberry Harar 15 years ago or something like that. Finding ways to deliver those experiences. I do think that is exciting, but by and large, yeah, you're right. Most folks don't want that every single day. But I think we're still just scratching the surface. I think that there's another role for these coffees. I've started playing with blending geisha and sidra 10-20% into blends, just as a way to sprinkle a little bit of extra in there rather than and keeping it at an affordable, accessible price point in this sort of familiar profile, but enhancing it. And I think that, some of these big fruity carbonic maceration or, particularly the aerobic style fermentations can be really nice in a blend if you know how to work with them. So I don't know that we need to close ourselves off to the idea of presenting them as part of a bigger coffee menu, having the opportunity to purchase more and experiment more in our own buying. But I do think that we need to be realistic about the fact that most customers don't actually want that.
Sure. Well, I like what you just said, which it sounds like enhanced familiar, like the idea that there's something that you love about coffee and we're not taking that away, but you're using these tools that have been experimented with and given to you as ingredients to play with to enhance, but not change so dramatically that it's off-putting.
Yeah. I mean, and if you look around the world, I hate to bring it back to winemaking. As I just said, coffee's not like wine, but you look at most of the good red blends coming out of like Bordeaux. You look on the back of the bottle and see what that blend is. And there's just 50% of this, 40% of this, 10%. That's kind of similar to what we're doing in coffee, whether you want to add a little bit more florality or a little bit more sweetness. Sometimes you can't find that in a single origin, meaning like a single cultivar grown at a specific altitude from this parcel processed in this way. Sometimes you just have to add a little bit of something else. And I think that can be a tremendous opportunity as a buyer. It also offers you a lot of opportunity as a retailer to recombine your inventory and in ways that deliver more unique experiences.
So you are talking to a roaster who is now wanting to make decisions on bringing in coffees to develop their menu. What mindset and practical steps do they need to take to discover, or just how should they approach these processing methods in a way that allows them to have a greater chance of success rather than maybe going so far over the edge that it like I said turns off their customers. How do we approach these things when we're developing our menu in a practical way? Say if we wanted to just turn over a new leaf in 2023, is it like a year or 2 year process to sort of develop a new roasting menu for your clients, your wholesale clients, your customers?
I think it depends on your specific buying program. For me, I'm typically booked 10 months out. So if I want to make any change, it's got to be pretty far down the line. But some folks come up upon needs. They had a great year, they grew, or for whatever reason they under forecasted their needs, and a spot position opens up. I think that's a really great opportunity to do something new and play with it. And from there, my only recommendation is to taste everything, taste a lot, spend a lot of time on the cupping table. Some of these coffees do roast differently. So really getting to know the nuances of how they roast, how they hold up over time, because they do change. Some of them are quite unstable. Will give you access to the best information to make a decision about where it might work.
So describe a little bit more in detail what you're talking about when it comes to some of these might roast differently. And I imagine also because of that, your customers having these on their kitchen counters would also experiment or would also have the experience of the coffee aging differently. So what are the downstream impacts that we need to be aware of and then pass on to our customers?
Sure. So it's been observed that some of the more, the quote unquote anaerobic styles of fermentation will lead coffee to age in a way that it tastes very juicy at first, then it might get a little bit savory and funky, and then a few weeks later it cleans up again, and then it falls off entirely. So you just have a kind of unpredictable trend of flavor once the coffee is roasted. And that is a very coffee to coffee sort of experience. You just need to taste a lot of coffee over a lot of time to collect that data to see. It's also been observed that they might taste better extracted a little bit lower, which might change how you interact with it if you are a coffee shop, for example. You might not want to be, pushing your 22.5% EY batch brews. You might want to pull that back down to 20 again. Just to present the coffee in the best possible light and with the character you bought it for, really. Another example is some of the yeast fermentation. So when we use selected yeast to control or dominate the fermentation, they might not crack as aggressively. It might be almost like a decaf with how they roast, and that can trick a lot of roasters and lead them to either over or underdevelop them. So it's just getting a handle on it, particularly as you're sample roasting. Sample roasting is one area where I think we need a lot of competency across the industry. And I look forward to some more guidance from SCA and CQI on that. But until that happens, just spend a lot of time roasting, re-roasting these samples to make sure that you're giving them a fair treatment and approach them in slightly different ways than you would your ordinary wash or natural processes.
And I guess that would mean you need to buy enough to be able to experiment over time. What guidance would you give somebody who wants to get a handle on an experimental process or a new process of coffee, new to them at least, to give enough time? Yeah, because a lot of these are not as large in their quantities as our typical washed Guatemalans.
Yeah. It's a really hard thing. If you're a small roaster, you might buy 30 kilos vacuum sealed of some very expensive lot and only get 1 or 2 shots at roasting it. And you have to sell that coffee. That's a real tangible business tension. So do the best you can. Hold it back, maybe a pound or 2 or a kilo or whatever. Taste it over time, and then if you happen to buy a lot like that again, incorporate the lessons that you learned. Hopefully, you took detailed notes, and do the best you can. Is basically my advice. It's like everything else. It's a lot of trial and error, and I don't have specific overarching guidance because an anaerobic lot could mean so many things. But just, be aware that they might roast, grind, extract, and age a little differently.
So the conversation about terroir, that's just the pure traditional understanding of terroir as soil and sun and all that stuff, versus the processing, which is overlaid, in a sense, on that. Does that create more consistency year to year when you're talking about an anaerobic from a particular farm in 2022 versus 2023? Are you less likely to see variance because the process is more controlled and not so reliant on the weather?
So if it in fact is controlled, I would say yes, just because those processes can be so loud and dominate the the root notes of that coffee. But if the process is not well controlled, which is the case in much of the world, just because of lack of access or infrastructure, then you will experience variation of the process that presents differently in the cup. But either way, you might not be tasting whatever the underlying material is as much. I don't know if that answers the question, but this year it might be very, very robustly candied strawberry with a lemongrass finish, perhaps some thyme, and then next year it's just a kombucha bomb.
Okay. So do you see a future where, or is it currently happening that roasters are selecting these processes as an insurance policy against inconsistency?
I think we're starting to see the people who like funkier profiles attracted to them, and everyone else is just cupping them out of curiosity. I don't know that people are necessarily seeking them out for consistency yet. I think the ones who are most concerned about consistency are still buying your typically washed coffees.
Okay. Yeah. If I am talking to you as a roaster and you're walking and I say to you, I've just been browsing the internet, watching some videos, and I want to buy.
Yes, we do.
That's what we do. That's how we make our decisions. Listening to a podcast or something. And I want to have these coffees. These are what I want. Now, there might be conversations where you come in and say, well, maybe are you sure? Or walk them through a process of making the right decision in spite of maybe the initial start of the conversation where it was like just headstrong, I want this. At the end of the conversation, they might have a different opinion about that because of something that you've said to them. Do you have those conversations sometimes? And how might that go if you're talking to us about what's right for our particular roasting?
Yeah, I have those conversations a lot. Many times it's companies that want to be perceived a different way in the marketplace than they currently are. And so they hope that by rolling out a single origin program or bringing in this specific funky new process that they will be perceived a certain way. And I have to basically do the delicate dance of convincing them that you don't have to carry that coffee, and that if you want to be perceived a different way, then throwing this one coffee is not the best way to do it. We can move your entire book in that direction, and we have to make sure that it is consistent throughout your menu. Otherwise, it's a lot of effort for little to no payoff, and you're going to alienate the customers that you already do have. It's a journey over time. Mm-hmm. So that tends to be what I say, or I will try to corral it to some low risk part of the business, because for them it is a business decision. And rather than committing to, let's, instead of buying 20 or 50 bags of some weird process, I might say, let's just do 2 and do it as an online exclusive to start. And trying to kind of dip their toe in that way, but do it in a way that is sustainable for them as a business and won't alienate their customers, and is still within the integrity of whatever their program is now.
Right. Whether they've actually cultivated that program, line by line, or it's just evolved, it is what it is, and they have to be cognizant of that. And it sounds like that's, in this example, it sounds like the example of somebody who's been in business for long enough to have these expectations. But what about new roasters that are setting out with the intention of making their mark in the industry? Is it just as important that they have this kind of deference and limited approach to these experimental processes?
No, I mean, it's your company. You can do what you want with it, but you also have to be prepared to accept the consequences. So I think that there's the aesthetic experience is 2 parts, right? Like we put something out into the world, and then the public reacts. And you have to be open to that second part, or you're going to fail. That's simply it. Or you need to find a way to access the people who do respond well to it. And that might not be in the city where you're located. That's just how it works. And so I don't know what to say other than we need to be calibrated. And what being calibrated means is not that we necessarily are able to taste all of the nuance in everything. Like most of us in coffee are not super tasters for a reason. We need to be able to connect with the other buyers. We need to be able to connect with the other coffee lovers who are going to be willing to show up for us and give us their money for our coffee. So find your people through your marketing, through your engagement. From there, try and grow something with them in mind. But of course, you're going to be driving it because you are the expert. You are the one who is creating this aesthetic experience for everyone to enjoy.
Yeah, well said. Increasingly, the customers of specialty coffee are specialty coffee professionals, and we're buying each other's coffee. And it's a little like an extended version of the grand opening where all your friends and family come and you're like, we're so successful as a coffee shop. So
line out the door.
Oh my gosh. And then 5 months later, there's, this natural dip. But it seems like that dip is getting less, kind of like when cold brew has sort of made summer a lot easier for coffee shops.
Sure.
So in the industry, like when we're serving the public, what's the line between, or how can we parse out the difference between consumers that are outside the industry versus the ones that are inside the industry within the numbers of, how these coffees play? Because I could get in a major city, there might be a lot of baristas from other shops and places that are ordering online through subscription services. And I could just be saying, wow, customers, as just that word, customers love this process, but in fact, it may just be like 80% of them are baristas from other states.
Sure. Yeah, that totally could be the case. If I would say rely on a lot of any analytics that you have to discover who those customers are. Look at the interactions that you have with them if you do, whether it's via Zendesk or whatever e-commerce platform or Instagram. Yeah, and there's a good chance if they're asking you, if you're using high uniformity burrs, they're asking you for your water chemistry or whatever. They're not your typical customer. And from there, at the end of the day, we all live and die by the 80-20 rule. If you look at the revenue of any coffee shop, any roastery that I've ever consulted for or worked for, 80% of the revenue came from about 20-25% of the customers. So that's just a rule of thumb of business that also happens to apply, in my experience, to the coffee world. Mm-hmm. And that does give us 80% to play with. Those are the tourists, I call them, the people, travelers who come and go. They might come in when they're in the neighborhood and then not come back for 6 months. They might order online because they're curious to try something. And I do think it's important to have something in your sales funnel to hook them. So whether that's trying a new process and keeping one dangling for them to throw in their cart, or you have something exclusive on your brew bar, or some little a wink and a nod to get them engaged when they're there, in the hopes that they will return.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. A wink and a nod. And in the end, if you're selling, you might not even care who's buying it as long as you're selling.
Set your margins, I hope, but yeah.
Exactly. What this makes me want to ask, okay, so in the time that you've seen these processes sort of play out in these roasters' menus, which ones tend to be the most successful for them?
I think it really depends on the roaster. If you're a super high-end ninth wave roaster or whatever, you can pretty much get away with whatever you want. I look at some of the the elite quote unquote roasters in the world and the coffees that they have on their menu, and they've got a lot of experimental styles. Mm-hmm. If you're a more safe roaster in Cleveland or Louisville, you might have them sprinkling your menu, but your bread and butter is still going to be your conventionally processed coffees. And I think anaerobics are the style that you're starting to see creep into the mainstream, whether they're anaerobics washed, which I do love, or anaerobic naturals, which I don't love as much typically. You're starting to see those trickle in.
Okay, so that washed anaerobic tends to play pretty well, whether you're sprinkling it in.
Yeah, the yeast fermented coffees too. Those, again, they're more adjacent to your traditional profiles. And so I think that makes them an easier access road.
Okay. And when you say more adjacent to typical profiles, what do you mean?
They don't have big boozy things that I would have in my Q course marked as a taint or a fault.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
like classically speaking, they're still free of defects. They're clean, sweet, they're uniform, they're free of defects. Some of the other coffees do tend to tip on, you know, shoyu, kimchi, kombucha, sort of fermentation funk flavors that a lot of folks do love, but to us don't read as coffee flavor in the West. It doesn't have that brown water quality that we know and love. But if you have a washed coffee that also just has a little bit more tropical fruit and a creamy body, you're going to be down with that.
Now, entering into the new year, I might be really motivated to take a look at my own menu and say, here's how we move our book, as you've said, to this direction. And I want to do it well. What are maybe the first steps I should take, me and my team, to start doing that in a way that is honoring what we currently have built, but does kind of move it in a healthy direction?
I think the first thing you have to do is kind of take an inventory. The most successful buyers and roasters I know sort of have an understanding of either buckets or tiers of their coffee program, and those could be quality tiers, they could be product differentiation tiers, whether it's they're destined for different markets or flavor profiles. And from there, you have to break down, okay, what are the lot sizes that we're buying here? Is there a reason that we're buying those lot sizes? Is it because we're trying to change over the menu every 2 or 3 months, or are we trying to keep it on a full year? And then, are we brewing it as filter? Are we brewing it as espresso? How are we roasting it as part of that conversation as well? And from there, it's like, okay, we want to do this. Does this fit into our current operating model in terms of our tiers or our buckets? Does this fit with our mission or values? And if the answer is no, it doesn't fit our current coffee program, yes, it fits our values. I'm like, okay, then we need to either find a way to make it fit, or we need to invent something new. And if you're adding volume onto your existing book, that's a risk, because you don't want to be carrying coffee. You don't want to go long. It'll fade out, you'll lose value over time. Your customers will notice, whatever. But if you have a way to sort of do a little trial balloon, which is like when I was at Phoenix, toward the very end, I rolled out what we called the exposure series, and it was just a chance for me to play a little bit. I wanted to have a place on Phoenix's menu where I could offer some of the coffee that I worked on, that we frankly couldn't have afforded otherwise. Phoenix isn't the most price sensitive roaster in the world, but it's still in Cleveland. So most of the coffees on the menu were $16 to $18. And that allowed us to sell 150 grams for $25. And that made all the difference in the world. So even though I was only buying 200, 300 kilos of a coffee at a time, it allowed us to reach that niche customer and sort of push our product offering and our own lexicon as baristas and as coffee professionals about the types of coffees we served in a way that let us get familiar with them. And since then, of course, I've gone on to do other things, but in my capacity as a consulting buyer, I'm finding ways to integrate these coffees into other programs and still meet their price targets. And some of it is just experience, and some of it is building those supply chain connections, and a lot of it is spending time on the cupping table.
So a lot of this seems like, due diligence in figuring out if it ticks those boxes of your values and et cetera. And then also marketing, like what you just described. It's just like this it's the bookended by a bunch of marketing that says a limited time offer. We call it a series. And so you're kind of giving people the idea that this isn't necessarily the bread and butter of, in this case, Phoenix, or, fill in the blank for your roaster.
Sure.
So it mitigates some of that risk, but maybe also, energizes them to want to also experiment with you, I guess.
I think that's exactly right. We are, at the end of the day, trying to sell coffee, and marketing is always going to be a piece of that. And if you've got a subscription program, that might be a nice way to do it. Add on your experimental series that customers can opt into. And that gives you a lot of freedom.
Well, Christopher, it's always great to talk to you. And there's a lot more that we can learn from what you've been writing on your blog. So tell us where we can learn more about what you do for roasters and also what you've been writing.
Sure. You can always hop over to my Instagram. I keep a lot of the links live in my bio there. That's my username is Christopher Feran, which is literally just my name. Or you can go to myname.com, christopherferan.com, and you'll see the latest writing there. I'm working on like 6 or 7 pieces in various stages of completion. So I expect one of them to be done before the next decade. But we just survived Brazil arrival season, so we'll see how things go.
Nice. You've got some experimental, lots of blogs floating around there.
Yeah. Yep, exactly right.
All right. Thanks, Christopher, so much.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Talk to you soon.
Okay, everybody. Well, I think one of the main takeaways here, of course, is that you need to approach things with a measured hand. I really appreciate the idea of these, short runs, these marketed special occasions of, bringing in different processing methods in small quantities and taking these experimental methods and experimenting with your offerings to your customers and see how it plays. And of course, as Christopher talked about this, what they do in wine, where some of the best reds out there are blends, there's a lot of opportunities there as well for you to start integrating some of these processes into your normal lineup. It doesn't even have to be heavily marketed, but these are more tools in the toolbox for you to choose from. It really depends on how well you know the tools. And so you need to go to christopherferran.com and read this sort of glossary of coffee processes to get a better understanding of these things. And you yourself as a roaster can, start bringing some of these in to get an even deeper understanding by application. And of course, patience is part of this process. Do things in an intentional and measured way. So a big thank you to Christopher Feran for joining me on today's show. Of course, like I said, do yourself a favor, go visit christopherferran.com, read his blogs, reach out to him. And if you have any questions or comments from me, just email me. Chris@keystotheshop.com is where you can do that. And I would love to hear from you, see how we can improve the show. Always love hearing from listeners. And that's also where you can reach out if you're interested in working one-on-one with me to help you build and run an amazing coffee shop and to help you refine your operations to give you more freedom, more satisfaction in the work, and just more joy in the process of operation and ownership. Chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, every year, 4 times a year, there is an event, and that event is called Coffee Fest. I've been doing this since 2004. It's definitely over 60 coffee fests so far that I've been to as a trainer, as a presenter, and I love going there because I've grown so much, and I also see so much value being delivered to the people who attend Coffee Fest through the accessibly priced or free lectures, trainings, workshops, panel discussions. I'm one of those presenters amongst many who are presenting on a variety of topics that will help make you a better professional and run a better business. There's also the cold brew competition, Coffee Fest Latte Art World Championship Open, of which I am a head judge. There's the trade show floor, which of course we have vendors from all over offering services and wares and products for your coffee shop. You get to talk directly with people about those things. And there's, of course, the community of coffee that you get to be a part of in this magical confluence of coffee nerdery, I suppose. And so I really want you to be a part of one of these shows coming up. There's New York, Louisville, Kentucky, Anaheim, California, and Orlando, Florida. And you can go to coffeefest.com to learn more about those and register yourself and your team. You can save 50% by using the code KEYS, KEYS, when you register at coffeefest.com. See what's on offer, which one of these shows you want to go to, and I hope to see you there. Again, for more information, go visit coffeefest.com. And with that, that is the end of our show today, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to Keys to the Shop. Don't forget to share these episodes with your team. And if you love what we're doing here and it's really benefited you, drop a 5-star review over at Apple Podcasts. That would be wonderful. Thanks again very much for joining me in this conversation with our guest, Christopher Feran, on coffee processing. Have a wonderful day, and as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.